Welcome to the Radically Genuine Podcast. I'm Dr. Roger McFillin. I became a psychologist because I really cared about living the highest quality of life possible. With all the challenges that exist here in the course of a lifetime, the difficult moments, the love, the loss, some of the horrific trauma that people face, the fears, the worry, and everyone's individual reaction to those situations. I was always interested in how do people recover from those events and grow from it, transform into something greater, and they fulfill their sole purpose. My work has really taken me to places that I could not have envisioned 20 years ago, because where I am now is I am examining the fundamental understanding of what reality is. When you think about our world in terms of the three dimensional, just the material, there's a lot of limitations to living a life to the highest quality when you may be missing some of the most important aspects of what our experience is that incorporates the unseen. So that has taken me to post material science, the impact of consciousness on our experience, to understand that life in itself is not limited just to this one incarnation, that we have science that supports a post-material perspective, meaning that we are more than just this human experience. Consciousness is not emitted from the brain, and that we may have capabilities, powers even, that extend beyond anything that is discussed in contemporary society, and that could be purposeful. In my last podcast, I spoke about the war on human consciousness and introduced a gentleman by the name of Robert Monroe, who started the Monroe Institute. Just a very quick summary of who he was. He was a radio broadcasting executive, New York City, founded a production company called Ram Enterprises in 1953, and at its peak was producing 28 network radio programs a month, quiz shows, dramas. He's a vice president, board member of the Mutual Broadcasting System. He was listed in Who's Who in America, kind of a suit and tie guy. Not the gentleman you would predict would develop a career after 1958, because what happened to him was something that he could not explain. He started having out of body experiences. They were spontaneous, they were repeated. He could verify details of the experience from locations he had never been to. So, remote viewing, his consciousness would leave his body. And he thought he was losing his mind. So, he went to physicians, psychiatrists. They found nothing. I think if he experienced this today and went to a psychiatrist, he might be diagnosed with having some delusions or potentially having to rule out schizophrenia. But there was no epilepsy, no dissociative disorder. There's no drug-induced states, none of it. And so the man kept running his corporations. He kept raising his family. He kept functioning at the highest level of his career. But what he started doing from that point forward is he approached it like he approached business, almost from like the perspective of being an engineer. And in order to learn more about what was happening to him, he founded a research institute in Faber, Virginia, called the Monroe Institute. He brought in academic collaborators. He worked with parapsychologist Charles Tart at UC Davis on a controlled target reading experiments. But before any of that work could become operational, he required technology that would make the altered states he was exploring replicable, something other people could use, something a researcher could deploy in a controlled setting and get consistent results. So let me tell you about Hemi-Sync. You cannot understand what Monroe built without understanding the technology he built it on. This is called Hemi-Sync, short for hemispheric synchronization. The science behind it is not Monroe's. It goes back to 1839. A German scientist named Heinrich Wilhelm Dove discovered something strange about the way the brain processes sound. If you play one frequency into the left ear and a different frequency into the right ear, the brain does not just hear two separate tones. The two hemispheres work together to construct a third tone, a phantom tone, a perceived frequency that does not exist in the physical sound itself. It is the brain's response to the difference between the two real frequencies. So the third tone is called a binaural beat. You might have heard of it. If you play 120 hertz in one ear and 120 hertz in another, the brain hears an 8 hertz beat. The 8 hertz signal is electrical, not acoustic. The brain constructs it internally. So here's where it gets interesting. The brain then begins to entrain to that constructed frequency. The dominant brainwave activity of the listener starts oscillating at the rate of the binaural beat. This is called the frequency following the response. It is a documented neurological phenomenon observed in EEG studies. Different brainwave frequencies correspond to different states of consciousness. So, delta waves below 4 hertz are the deepest stages of our sleep. Theta waves between 4 and 8 hertz are that deep meditation state. REM dreaming, the borderlines of consciousness, all in this theta wave. Alpha waves are between 8 and 13 hertz, are relaxed wakefulness. And then the beta waves above 13 are the active thinking and focused attention mind of the awakened individual. What Monroe figured out between 1956 and 1975 with his work is that by carefully designing the frequencies played into each ear, you can guide the brain into specific states of consciousness reliably and repeatedly. You can put a person into deep meditation in 20 minutes. You can put them at the threshold of sleep without crossing over into sleep. You can train them into theta states that would otherwise take a meditator decades of practice to potentially reach. This is one piece of what the Hemi-Sync does. The second piece is what gave the technology its name: hemispheric synchronization. Under the right conditions, the binaural beat causes the left and the right hemispheres of the brain to synchronize their electrical activity, both sides firing at the same frequency, at the same amplitude, at the same time. Now, this is a state most human beings almost never enter. The brain normally operates with one hemisphere dominant. Hemi-Sync forces a whole brain state, coherent, unified, symmetrical. That state, in Monroe's research, is the doorway. It is where consciousness can detach from the body. It is where the focus levels become accessible. It's what made the gateway process replicable. And Monroe filed for the first Hemi-Sync patents in 1975. They are public record. And this is the moment the United States military partnered with him. So meditation is something that I've committed my life to. It's not always easy, and most people struggle to enter into meditation. And you can't just learn it quickly and become a master of it. It's something that requires consistency over time. Hemi-Sync, though, on the other hand, seems to change the experience. It's something that you can use and immediately enter into these brainwave states where, like, Tibetan monks are able to enter into, as if they've committed their lifestyle to it. So you just put the headphones on, you play the file, and then the frequencies do the work. The brain entrains, consciousness shifts, the state is replicable, measurable, and operational. So that is what the Army needed. That's what the Army got. Today, the Monroe Institute has trained tens of thousands of people in Hemi-Sync. There are apps, there are downloads, there are now adjacent technologies, different tones, audio visual entrainment. They produce similar or even better effects. Now, here's the part that I think is important for today's episode. This technology has been freely available for 50 years. The patents have been public for that amount of time. The military used it. The CIA studied it. Anyone in the world can access it today for the price of a pair of headphones. And we never use this technology. Almost no clinician in the mental health system has ever recommended it to a patient, which I find interesting. You'll find a psychiatrist who will write an SSRI prescription in the first session. A family doc will write it in 10 minutes. You'll find a family doc will hand you benzodiazepine without you finish even describing your symptoms. You have cognitive therapists, all different types of therapists who will assign you a book, and you'll go through various forms of manualized kind of care and unstructured therapies. But nowhere can I really find in the mainstream healthcare environment telling you to put on these headphones, listen to a frequency for 30 minutes a day, and let your brain entrain into the states the contemplative traditions have been discussing about for thousands of years. So I thought that was curious. Like, why isn't this more widely known? I mean, I'm a board certified clinical psychologist. You'd think it should be easily found in the literature, and we'd be studying it significantly. But that's not true. And I can only begin to discern that. I mean, everyone who has followed my episodes understands that I see a lot of the sick care system to have both financial incentives to keep people sick and dependent, but I also see a history of intelligence agency informed brainwashing operations to make it simple, to create this form of economic dependence, but also create a population that is much more compliant. Okay. I think there's many reasons why it's not mainstream, but here's why it matters and why the United States government showed up at the Monroe Institute and never left. 1977, Army intelligence officer named Skip Atwater walked into the Monroe Institute. He was working on a classified project. The Army was responding to intelligence reports that the Soviet Union was investing significant resources into what they called psychotronic research, the use of psychic abilities for espionage. So remote viewing of foreign military installations, like locating submarines under the ocean, reading documents inside sealed safes. And Atwater walked into the Monroe Institute because he wanted to test Hemi-Sync personally. He had his first out-of-body experience during that visit. He went back to the Army and reported what had happened. And on July 13th, 1978, the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence of the U.S. Army formally authorized an operational program. It was originally called Grill Flame. Over the years, it would be renamed Center Lane, then Sunstreak, and finally, its most famous iteration, Project Stargate. Mentioned this briefly in the last episode. From 1978 to 1995, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the United States Army jointly funded remote viewing programs that trained intelligence personnel in altered states of consciousness, in part using Hemi-Sync technology developed at the Monroe Institute. The total budget across those 17 years was approximately $20 million. The program had offices at Fort Meade. It had personnel. It produced real intelligence reports forwarded to real officers within the Defense Department. The most famous operator was a man by the name of Joseph McMoneagle. He was awarded the Legion of Merit, one of the highest peacetime declarations in the United States military, for providing intelligence of, and I'm quoting this citation here, uniquely vital nature to the security of the United States. And this was for psychic spying, for remote viewing, for doing the thing the materialist worldview would say is impossible. McMoneagle is still alive. He gave a 6-hour interview on the Sean Ryan show last year, so you can watch it there. In 1983, in the middle of all of this, the Army commissioned a lieutenant colonel named Wayne McDonald to write a formal scientific analysis of the Gateway process. And McDonald's job was to explain how the technology worked at a theoretical level and to evaluate whether it had legitimate intelligence applications. What he produced is one of the strangest documents the United States has ever generated. I mentioned this in my other episode. It's 29 pages long. It draws on the work of neuroscientist Carl Pribram and the physicist David Bohm. It concludes that the universe behaves like a hologram. That reality is, at its most fundamental level, information. That consciousness is not produced by the brain, but received by it. That trained human awareness can detach from the body and operate independently of it. That time, from the perspective of diffused or detached consciousness, is not linear. So time in itself is not linear. We think about everything in terms of past, present, future. A properly trained operator can access what McDonald calls the absolute, a unified information field outside ordinary space-time from which any past, present, or future event is in principle retrievable. This document does not hedge. It states that consciousness survives physical death. It draws direct parallels between its own conclusions and the cosmologies of Tibetan Buddhism, Hindu sacred texts, and Christian mystical theology. This is a uniformed officer of the United States Army writing this for the Central Intelligence Agency in 1983. So you can understand, as a clinical psychologist who's absolutely fascinated with the human experience and cares deeply about living a life of the highest value and purpose and helping people transcend suffering, that understanding the nature of reality is fundamental to this. That particular document was classified for 20 years, and they declassified it in 2003. It sits in the CIA's FOIA reading room right now, free. You can download it tonight. You can read it yourself. You don't have to take my word for any of this. That is who Robert Monroe was. That's what he built. And that's what the United States military partnered with him to do for 17 years. And then he wrote 3 books that explain what he found. And this is what I've been exploring recently. In 1971, he published his first book. He called it Journeys Out of the Body. That book is the reason the phrase out-of-body experience exists in the English language. Before Monroe wrote it, the phenomenon went by older labels: astral projection, soul travel. All of those terms carried religious or occult baggage that kept the subject locked inside particular traditions. And Monroe wanted to approach this like an engineer. So he stripped the vocabulary down, clean observational prose, no theology, no incantations, just what happened, when, where, and what was verifiable. The book documents his first 12 years of out-of-body data from 1958 to 1970, hundreds of episodes, cross-checked, logged, dated. Charles Tart wrote the introduction. Tart was the academic parapsychologist at the University of California, Davis. He put his name on Monroe's work because the methodology was sound and the data was solid. What Monroe described in that book has 3 big pieces. The first is what he called the second body. Every human being has one. It is the vehicle of consciousness when the physical body is asleep or unconscious. He learned to use it at his will. The second is what he called the 3 locales. Locale 1 is the physical world, observed from outside the physical body. Locale 2 is a thought-responsive realm where what you think instantly becomes what you experience. Reality there is composed, in his own words, of deepest desires and frantic fears. Locale 3 is a parallel reality with its own geography, its own civilizations, and its own physical laws. The third is contact with the dead. He met and identified people who had died, including details he could not have known through ordinary means. So stop, take a breath, consider what that book did in 1971. So a serious businessman, no religious framework, with no occult interest, with no skin in any spiritual game, said publicly that consciousness can leave the body, death is not the end, and that there are other realms of existence with structure and inhabitants. He said that in 1971, and that book sold over 1 million copies. And then the entire materialist scientific establishment ignored him. This is the part you need to understand. The brain science of 1971 was already locked into the assumption that consciousness is produced by the brain. The mind is what neurons do. Now, when the brain dies, consciousness is generated as it generates, dies with it, right? This is still today. Monroe demolished that assumption with documented, replicated, verifiable evidence over more than a decade, and nothing happened. The materialist consensus continued as if the data did not exist. So they don't want you to have it, folks. Fast forward 55 years. Today we have peer-reviewed near-death experience research from Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia, from Pim van Lommel in the Netherlands, from Sam Parnia and the AWARE studies at NYU. We have terminal lucidity research documenting dementia patients regaining full clarity hours before death, despite their brain being demonstrably destroyed by the disease. Every piece of this research confirms what Monroe wrote in 1971. The brain does not produce consciousness, it receives it. And this is the first piece of the foundation. In 1985, he published his second book, Far Journeys. This is the book that is extremely interested. In 1985, is no longer alone with this data. The Institute has been operating for 11 years. Hundreds of people have been trained in Hemi-Sync. Many of them are having their own verifiable out-of-body experiences. The findings are now coming in from multiple replicating witnesses, not just from him. The Army Intelligence Partnership is in full operation. The CIA Gateway process document has been completed. Monroe is, at this point in his life, one of the most consequential consciousness researchers in the world, and he is operating largely unknown to the public. Far Journeys is where he lays out the system. He introduces a numbered framework for mapping states of consciousness. He calls these focus levels. Focus 10 is mind awake, body asleep. Focus 12 is expanded awareness. Focus 15 is no time, a state outside linear time. Focus 21 is the bridge between physical reality and non-physical reality, the death transition point. Focus 27 and above are afterlife reception centers and higher dimensional environments. These are repeatable, replicable states that thousands of people have reached using Hemi-Sync. In Far Journeys, Monroe introduces what he calls InSpecs, intelligence species, non-human, non-physical intelligence that he encountered repeatedly during this exploration. Some of them functioned as teachers. They transmitted information in compressed bursts he called rote, related organized thought energy. He would receive in an instant what would take hours to translate into linear language. He introduces belief system territories. This one matters, so stay with me. Belief system territories are regions of the afterlife organized by what people believed when they died. So Christians who expected a Christian heaven find themselves in something that looks like one. Atheists who expected oblivion get nothing for a while. Hindus go where Hindus go, and Muslims go where Muslims go. What people believe collectively becomes their lived reality. I'm going to have to say that again. What people believe collectively becomes their lived reality. And then in Far Journeys, he introduces the term loosh. We're going to spend serious time on loosh in a few minutes, so hold that thread. Because he published another book in 1994. This is his third book, Ultimate Journey. This is the year before he died. He was 79 years old. He had spent 36 years exploring non-physical reality. He had funded the Institute. He's partnered with the U.S. military now for 17 years. He had been right about everything the materialist establishment said he could not be right about. Ultimate Journey is the summation, the completed map. In this book, he tells you what it all means. The central concept is what he calls the I there. Your I there is your larger soul, the composite of all your lifetimes, all your experiences across dimensions, all the versions of you that exist in non-physical reality. You are not who you think you are. What you think of as yourself is a temporary fragment, a single life, a single perspective, currently incarnated in this body, in this century, on this planet. The larger reality of who you are is much bigger and operates across many lifetimes and many forms. The Hindus call it the Atman. The Sufis call it the higher self. Christians call it the soul in the deepest sense of the word. But there's a higher soul, not just the soul of this experience. The Egyptians called it the Ba. Monroe introduces the Earth life system. He said, Earth is a school, a curriculum. We do not come here by accident. We do not get assigned here as punishment. We come here voluntarily from a place he calls home, or KT95, to learn things that can only be learned through the challenges of this physical environment in polarity. The reason we forget where we come from when we incarnate is purposeful. If you remembered your home, you could not engage with the school. The forgetting is the design. Monroe describes this in the book, the map of what happens after death. Entry ramps, exit ramps, signposts, hazards. He tells you what to expect, where to go, and how not to get stuck in the lower focus levels. A year after publishing this book, he died. He said everything he came to say. Now stand back and look at what he accomplished. 3 books, 30 years. The first lays the foundation. Consciousness can operate independently of the body. Death is not the end. The map of non-physical reality is real. The second lays out the system, focus levels, intelligences, the harvest. I'll tell you more about that. The third explains the meaning, who we are, where we came from, why we're here, how we get out. This is one man's work, documented, replicable, patented, validated by an academic parapsychologist at UC Davis. This stuff is fascinating, and it completely challenges the paradigm that governs our medical field, our mental health field, our religious doctrine, and our understanding of existence. So now I want to spend time on that word I mentioned earlier. It's called louche. Of everything Monroe wrote across 37 years of exploration, this is the concept that is fascinating to me and helps explain a lot of what is going on. It is a concept that once you understand it, you cannot stop seeing it almost every aspect of our life. The word appears in Far Journeys, which is the one published in 1985. He chose a made-up word deliberately. He did not want the religious baggage that comes with words like soul or spirit or prana or chi. He wanted a clean term for a clean phenomenon. And here's what he saw. During one of his out-of-body explorations, he was given what he called a rote, a compressed information download from a higher intelligence. The rote was about the history and purpose of Earth. The download said that Earth was designed by an entity Monroe simply called someone. Someone wanted to harvest a particular kind of energetic byproduct. Someone built a system to maximize the production of that product. He called the byproduct louche. In Monroe's account, louche is an energetic emission produced by living beings. Specifically, during the metabolic process, the Krebs cycle. The same Krebs cycle every high school biology student learns about, that cellular respiration cycle that converts food into ATP, the way your body produces energy at the mitochondrial level. Plants produce it, animals produce it, humans produce it in the most concentrated form of all. And it is most concentrated when produced under certain conditions of intense emotion. He was specific. The highest grade of loose comes from four conditions: loneliness, combat, violence, mothers having to defend their young, and sacrifice. Loneliness, combat, mothers defending their young, sacrifice. Now, take a look at the darkness of our modern world. We have engineered the most lonely society in human history, the breakdown of the family, the collapse of community, the atomization of the individual into isolated digital silos. The Surgeon General has declared loneliness a public health emergency. 40% of American adults report being chronically lonely. The most connected generation in history is the most isolated in history. We've engineered permanent wars. These wars never end. The enemies just rotate. The killing machine never sleeps. There's trillions of dollars vanish into every year while, here at home, our bridges collapse, our food sources are poisoned. We've engineered an attack on life itself, the natural process of birthing, protecting children. We've medicalized the entire culture. We've replaced our society with these corporate interventions at every stage. Mothers are being told their instincts are wrong, their bodies are wrong, their children's emotions are wrong. The mother defending her young is the highest grade loose source on the planet, so the mother defending her young has to be neutralized. And we have engineered a culture in which sacrifice has been redefined. Sacrifice no longer means service to something higher. Sacrifice now means accepting whatever the regime requires. Sacrifice your job for a medical intervention like an mRNA technology. Sacrifice your savings for the economy. Sacrifice children to a school system that is really indoctrination. Every loose-producing condition Monroe named in 1985 has been industrialized. Monroe wrote about the dairy farm. The cows do not know they are on a farm. They have grass and water and shelter. They are taken care of. They produce milk, which they do not understand that they are producing for someone else. The cows think the farm exists for the cows. It does not exist for the milk. And we are the cows. The grass and the water and the shelter are our jobs and our entertainment and our drugs. The milk is the loose. The farm is everything around us. Monroe even calls humans the second crop, the implication being there was a first crop, a previous iteration, perhaps an earlier civilization or species that was harvested and replaced. And there will be others after us. Now, I want to be careful here. This entire conversation is very dark. This concept can be received in two ways. You can hear it and fall into despair. You can conclude that we are slaves, that the system is unbreakable, that resistance is meaningless. And I would say that reading is wrong. It is also exactly what the harvest requires you to conclude. So despair is louche. The other way to receive it is the way Monroe finally received it himself in his last book, Ultimate Journey. He returns to the louche concept and explains what the higher intelligences eventually taught him. The harvest is real, but the harvest is not the deepest purpose. The deepest purpose of Earth is to produce souls capable of generating the highest frequency of all, which is unconditional love. Pain is the boot camp, love is the diploma. So the lower frequencies, fear, grief, rage, despair, that's the curriculum. The graduation is the moment a soul develops the capacity to operate from love regardless of what is being done to it. When you operate from love, the lower frequencies cannot reach you. You become invisible to the harvest. The intelligence that feeds on fear cannot detect a person in a state of love. This is what Christ meant. Perfect love casts out fear. This is what the Buddha meant, the unshakable mind. It's what the Sufis meant, annihilation and the beloved. Monroe came back from his explorations and confirmed, in working physics terms, what the contemplatives have been pointing at for thousands of years. The way out of the harvest is not resistance. Resistance is louche. Resistance is fuel. The way out is the deliberate cultivation of a frequency the harvest cannot consume. Now, let me ask you a simple question. For 5 years now or more, kind of this awake community has kind of been congratulating itself. We saw through the matrix, we caught the COVID lives, we named the censorship, we tracked the Great Reset, we watched the The lab leak could go from conspiracy to confirmed science. We were right about so much of this. So why does it keep getting worse? Like, look around. The Epstein client list never came. The men who flew to that island still walk the halls of power. They still write the op-eds. They still advise the president who promised to drain the swamp. The names are known. Nothing happens. The judge who sealed the records, the prosecutors who declined the charge, the federal agents who lost the evidence, the politicians who took the meetings, all of them still in place, still being paid with our tax dollars. Your grocery bill, I'm sure, is ridiculous. It's doubled why the official inflation rate insists you are imagining it. Rent has become an extraction event. The modest home that built the middle class now costs 3 times the median household income. It's nearly impossible to afford a home for a younger generation. Anything you actually need to live keeps climbing. And so the same priesthood that screamed climate emergency for 2 decades is also now breaking ground on AI data centers that consume the electricity of small nations and the water of entire watersheds. Not one of them objects. The carbon footprint of training a single large language model exceeds the lifetime emissions of dozens of human beings. The climate clergy is silent on this. They were never worried about the planet. They only were worried about your compliance and your fear provocation for a loose generation. We are pushed towards war with whoever we are told to hate this season. Russia, China, Iran. The enemy is always going to rotate. The wars are permanent. Division is the product. Go on mainstream media, go on social media, every platform, every channel, every algorithmic feed, it keeps sending you the same content, fear-based content, to be suspicious, to create division between you and your neighbors, red and blue, vax and unvax, pro-life and pro-choice, native and immigrant. The categories, they're constantly shifting, but the function does not. And everything is worse. So how is this possible if we are actually awakening? Because I would say we are not. We've been watching. There's a difference. And that difference is what Lush is. Awakening would be action. Awakening is a moral clarity translated into refusal. Awakening is the moment a soul stops broadcasting the frequency the harvest requires and starts broadcasting the frequency that ends it. So we're consumers. We consume all this. Watching fear delivered through a screen, and then we experience it in our bodies, even on a level that we aren't always consciously aware of. And we become harvested. So when you watch the latest leaked plan of the World Economic Forum and feel the terror rise in your chest, you're not awakening. You're being milked. When you doom scroll through the daily horror feed and let the cortisol flood your bloodstream, you are not awakening. You're being milked. When you spend 3 hours arguing with strangers on the internet about whether the election was stolen or whether the drugs are killing people, you're not awakening. You're being harvested. And the harvest does not care which side you are on. It only cares that you are emotionally activated, fearful, outraged, and consuming. We're losing our humanity, folks. It's engineered for division. You're the product. Now, it took me a while to understand this. 20 years ago, you had to dig through obscure websites for hints about surveillance, depopulation, central banking, or pharmaceutical fraud. Now they publish the blueprints. The Great Reset is a book. Eat the Bugs is a TED Talk. You'll own nothing and be happy is a promotional video with broadcast quality production. Chemtrails, once invisible, are now gridded across the sky in broad daylight. They're not hiding it anymore. They don't even care that we know. Have you asked yourself why? Because the revelation is the harvest. They show you the dystopia before your fear of the dystopia becomes clear, because the harvesting of that loosh is what builds it. Your terror is the construction crew. You're funding the mechanism. And every hour we spent engaging with this is an hour where our creative consciousness, our opportunity to build something separate, is hacked by them. And for years, I would write in my Substack, readers to resist. It's because I was still feeding the system. Like, resistance acknowledges the reality of what is being resisted. Resistance keeps your attention locked on the thing you do not want. Resistance is compliance, wearing some fake mask of defiance because we keep consuming. If you haven't heard of Paul Selig, he's a channeler. And for 15 years, his guides have spoken through him in a body of channeled texts I consider among the most important spiritual material of the modern age. The early works, I Am the Word, the Book of Love and Creation, the Book of Knowing and Worth, then the Master Trilogy, the Beyond the Known Trilogy, and the Manifestation Trilogy. All incredible books. His most recent one, Divine Union, deals directly with the shift to unity consciousness. I've read them all. And the teaching is consistent across all of them. And the central premise is eerily similar to Bob Monroe. You are a creator, not a victim. The world you live in is the world you have agreed to create. What you damn damns you back. When millions, even billions of human beings locked in the same predicted catastrophe, they generate what Selig's guides call an agreement field, a coherent collective resonance at a specific frequency. This is the collective consciousness. It crystallizes, it becomes reality, translates into institutions, the policies, the headlines, the lived conditions. This is exactly what Monroe was naming in 1985 when he described the belief system territories. Selig is using a different vocabulary 40 years later, but the mechanism is the same. What you collectively believe becomes your lived reality. The harvest depends on us believing it. Now, consider what your tax dollars are funding. We're funding wars we did not vote for, against enemies we've never met, in countries most Americans don't even know where it exists on a map, run by a Defense Department that has failed every audit it's ever been subjected to. We are funding the regulators who approve the chemicals, which is saturating the food supply, the glyphosate now in 75% of rainfall samples in the United States. The seed oils that displace traditional fats in every commercial kitchen in the US. The ultra-processed foods. We're funding the drug dealers masquerading as healthcare. The Schedule II amphetamines being prescribed to your sons for developmentally normal behavior. The SSRIs being prescribed to your daughters for normal distress of adolescence. We are funding the omnibus bills, that no senator reads, signed in the middle of the night, stripping rights that your great-grandparents died to protect. We're funding the surveillance of our own phones, our own speech, our own purchases. We are funding the data centers that consume the watersheds and the gigawatts to train the artificial intelligence systems that will eventually monitor and replace us. The same regime that called gas stoves a climate emergency is now powering up data centers that draw more electricity than entire small nations. So we're funding all of this, the chemtrails. We're funding the prosecutors who declined to prosecute the Epstein clients. We write the check, we fund all of it. So I started thinking, what would happen if we just collectively decided to stop? This is where moral noncompliance comes in. The system runs on voluntary compliance. It always has. There's a lot more of us than them. So let's look at federal tax revenue. Depends entirely on voluntary compliance. The IRS does not have the personnel to audit even 1% of returns. The current compliance rate is approximately 85%. Less than half of 1% of returns are ever audited. The IRS lost approximately 28,000 employees in 2025. It has no operational capacity to expand. The enforcement model is a paper tiger held up by the belief that there is a real tiger somewhere. If 10 to 15% of the Americans publicly stopped filing, the IRS could not build the cases. The courts could not try them. The prisons couldn't hold them. The enforcement model collapses on contact with mass refusal. A coordinated 5% with named leaders forces capitulation within months. See, the empire holds together because we keep paying. The moment it stops, it ends. And this has happened throughout history. Christ overturned temples or tables in a temple and called the religious authorities of his day a brood of vipers. The American colonists dumped the king's tea into Boston Harbor, refused his taxes. The conductors of the Underground Railroad broke every fugitive slave law in the books to deliver human beings to freedom. They knew they would be prosecuted. They did it anyway. Dietrich Bonhoeffer plotted against Hitler from inside a Lutheran seminary. He went to the gallows in April of 1945, still convinced he'd done the right thing. The White Rose students printed anti-Nazi leaflets in Munich. They were beheaded for it before any of them turned 25. The Romanians cornered Nicolae Ceausescu in a public square in December of 1989. That brutal, tyrannical leader, the regime that had ruled them with absolute power for decades, was gone in 72 hours. See, the regime can only do what we agree to fund and what we agree to obey. I want to be honest with you about this. Moral noncompliance is not safe. It's never been safe. The Christian martyrs paid in their bodies. The colonists paid. Everyone I mentioned paid. But every one of them, when the moment came, decided that the cost of continued compliance was higher than the cost of refusal. That is the moral calculation every generation eventually has to make, and we're in that moment now. And this is why an understanding of reality matters. If this is a school, if our souls exist beyond this physical incarnation, then we're here for a greater reason. I want you to sit with what all this means, because we pray for peace while writing the checks that buy the missiles. We pray for the healing of the sick child while funding the regulators who approve the poisons making her sick. We decry the Epstein class while paying the salaries of the prosecutors who let them walk. We've handed over this power. There's no neutrality on these line items. Continued payment is continued consent. At some point, compliance becomes complicity, and you have to decide whether you can live with that. So I'm going to leave you with this. The revolution is not coming. The revolution is your refusal to participate in their reality, multiplied by enough of us doing the same thing at the same time that the apparatus has nothing left to harvest. It's the simplest revolution in human history because it requires no weapons, no political party, no permission from any institution. It requires only that we stop feeding what was never sustainable to begin with, and we turn our energy towards what is. Withdraw your attention. When the Davos coverage streams, turn it off and create something with your children. When the algorithm pushes the latest dystopian leaks, shut the screen and plant something. When everyone in your feed is hyperventilating about the newest horror, organize a meal with your neighbors. They need your attention to build their world. Without it, they are just psychopaths talking to empty rooms. Build the parallel structures that make the central system irrelevant. Connect with local farmers, raising real animals on real grass. Build raw milk networks. Create food systems they cannot regulate, surveil, or shut down. Every backyard chicken or fermented vegetable, it's rebellion, it's resistance. Find the doctors who are pulling out of the sick care system, the midwives, the herbalists, the carpenters, the bakers, the men who can still fix things. Find small churches where the Holy Spirit can actually move because the room's small enough for the people in it to know each other. Find the parents willing to take their children out of the indoctrination system and teach them independence, knowledge, skills, and of course, morality. And inside yourself, do the deepest work of all. Refuse to be the louche. Refuse to broadcast the frequency that they tune into and they suck you dry of. This is the practice. Like more meditation, more prayer, more time in nature, silence, turn off the screens, eat real food, get real sleep, have real conversations with real human beings whose faces you can see. Put down the phone. Cultivate gratitude as a default state rather than fear. This is a deliberate choice every day to operate from love rather than terror. When you operate from love, the parasitic intelligences cannot perceive you. They're not on your frequency. You are invisible to the realms that feed on fear. This is what we've been told for years. This is biblical. This is across traditions, faith traditions. Perfect love casts out fear. The Epstein class loses its grip the moment we stop being shocked by what we already know. The pharmaceutical empire collapses the moment we stop accepting their diagnoses and chemical cures. It's an anti-life agenda. The endless wars, and the moment we stop watching the coverage and start building the local life that makes the empire irrelevant. Right? They declare war and nobody shows up. Is there war? There's billions of us. There are a handful of them. They cannot exist without our compliance. We need to awaken. We need to take back our sovereignty, our consciousness, and we build the alternatives. This is what Radically Genuine is going to transition into. Big news ahead coming this fall. Huge platform. Well-funded. Addressing a lot of these important concepts. Science outside the mainstream. Alternative systems. Daily practices. We're going to choose where our attention is going to be. And it's going to build out of love and not fear. Thank you.